Filmmaking is nothing if not an enterprise inherently fraught with risk. Studios pay tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars to directors with the hope of getting a sizable return on their investment. Now, with that can sometimes come a general reluctance to experiment and push boundaries, but that isn't always the case. Some movies refuse to do the most basic, safe thing and instead take big risks which could have so easily just fallen flat on their face. Guided by seasoned filmmakers with their stellar cast and crew, these movies all weather the storm and manage to deliver above and beyond what anyone could have reasonably expected. I'm Ewan, you're watching Whatculture, and here are a whole bunch of movies that took huge risks and nailed it. First up, no Harrison Ford until the third act, Blade Runner 2049. Even though the marketing for Blade Runner 2049 made it clear that Harrison Ford would only be reprising his role of Deckard in a supporting capacity, it was still generally expected that he'd appear early and often throughout the long-belated sci-fi sequel. But ultimately, Ford doesn't show his face for about 105 minutes, roughly 2/3 of the way through the film's runtime, when Ryan Gosling's Kay finally tracks him down in the ruins of Las Vegas, which, needless to say because it's Blade Runner, is far from the bright light city that set Elvis's soul on fire all those moons ago. Don't know why I felt the need to just throw a little bit of Elvis in there, but here we are. Thank you very much. But getting back on track, the film is so engrossing up to the point where Ford's Deckard comes in, and the third act serves as such a fitting capper to his story that, it's really tough to begrudge the decision at all. Compare this to Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens, another legacy sequel released around the same time, which spent so much time hyping up Mark Hamill's return as Luke Skywalker, only for many to be left disappointed by his seconds-long role in the film. Here, though, Ford was featured more explicitly in Blade Runner 2049's marketing, and yet while his part was also smaller than expected, it didn't seem like a cynical, calculated choice in the slightest, but simply what made the most sense for the story being told. And yeah, of all the legacy go-arounds Ford has done in the last decade, wouldn't you know it, 2049 is still the best of the bunch. Next up, taking place entirely in a coffin, Buried. Single-location films are incredibly tough to pull off, no matter how talented a filmmaker might be. But Rodrigo Cortez's 2010 horror thriller Buried took this to basically ridiculous extremes, given that the movie takes place entirely inside a coffin in which protagonist Paul Conroy, Ryan Reynolds, is indeed buried. When the film was first announced, there were reasonable assumptions that at least some of it would be set outside the coffin, because a film set wholly within the confines of a tiny pine box seemed not only impossible, but also potentially maybe, a bit boring. But in what's frankly a flabbergasting accomplishment, love it when that word shows up, Cortez doesn't cheat the audience or take the easy way out for cutaways. We are genuinely in the coffin with Conroy for the entire 95-minute runtime. It's ultimately a testament to Ryan Reynolds' thoroughly engaging performance and tolerability, the tight script, and some of Cortez's more creative camera work that Buried remains so engaging from start to finish, even with such a drastically confined setting that could have easily felt like a bit of a gimmick. Next up, replacing Robbie Williams with a CGI monkey, Better Man. The overwhelming majority of musician biopics don't do anything particularly inventive or innovative because there's a clear formula that connects with audiences. Telling a rags-to-riches tale packed with euphoric highs and dramatic lows, hopefully aided by a well-cast lead who successfully embodies the real-life figure. We call this the walk the line kind of formula, which was destroyed by Walk Harder Dewey Cox story, and yet we keep getting more and more movies that are basically walk the line. Why? But one biopic about an influential 20th century musician that isn't walk the line was the Robbie Williams biopic Better Man, and it's great, and barely anyone went to see it, which is not entirely surprising, but is still endlessly frustrating because it's a banger. Because it apparently wasn't enough of a marketing challenge that Williams isn't particularly well known outside of Europe, filmmaker Michael Gracie decided to represent Williams throughout the film as a CGI chimpanzee. This was intended to reflect Williams' own perception of himself as an unevolved, performing monkey, but it also caused the film's budget to skyrocket to an eye-watering $110 million. And though Better Man was quite predictably a box office flop with its wild concept simply being too weird for mainstream tastes, it is on its own merits an incredibly fearless piece of work that totally blows the conventions of the music biopic wide open. Its commercial failure probably means we won't see another movie like this anytime soon, but we should all just be glad it exists, you know? Like, I'd rather a bajillion of these and also Elvis than milquetoast, walk the line-esque movies like A Complete Unknown or Deliver Me From Nowhere any day of the week. You know, every day I wake up in pure fear, just sweat about those Beatles movies, because, sorry, I'm gonna need to move on. The Beatles movie is just, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. It's really annoying me. Moving on. The genre shift. Parasite. Bong Joon-ho's Parasite was marketed as a clever capitalist satire, and for its first act, that certainly appears to be the vibe. Yet midway through the film, there is a major tonal shift where it segues into an outright thriller. And again, the genre shifts in the third act into more outright heightened horror territory as all hell begins to break loose, but ultimately all still in service of its kind of satirical through line. You know, it would have been incredibly easy for a less disciplined filmmaker to lose their grasp of the tonal through line and deliver an unwieldy mess. But Bong handles the transition between moods expertly, aided by a cast that is clearly on the same page. And yet, honestly, what says nailing it more than winning the Best Picture Oscar, and better yet, being the first non-English language film to go and do it? Next up, killing Ryan Gosling early. The Place Beyond the Pines. Derek Cianfrance's epic crime drama The Place Beyond the Pines was marketed as following Ryan Gosling's motorcycle stuntman Luke Glanton, and while that's true up to a point, Luke ultimately dies at the end of the first act, being shot by cop Avery Cross, Bradley Cooper, and falling straight out of a window. It is a hugely shocking moment, and one which had the sure potential to alienate audiences, especially as the perspective then shifts abruptly to Avery, and later on, both Luke and Avery's teenage sons, played by Dane DeHaan and Emery Cohen. But the engrossing script and evocative direction hold firm, ensuring that though some Gosling diehards might have been going, yeah, well, you know, the movie had plenty left to fill the void. You know, you came into it wanting some bit of the old Gosmeister, and you came out of it going, you know what? That was an appropriate and tasteful amount of the Gauze, and we got a little bit of Coop to make up for it. And yeah, it's an especially ballsy creative decision considering the film's hefty 140-minute runtime, ensuring Gosling is missing for the back hour and a half, but didn't stop the film tripling its $15 million budget at the box office. Great movie, one that really holds up well. Next up, inventing a new visual language. The Matrix. The Matrix is basically a wall-to-wall carousel of extremely bold creative risks, particularly with regard to how the Wachowski sisters effectively reinvented the visual language of modern action storytelling. Again, it's kind of a movie that I think a lot of us take for granted, but there's really no overstating just how influential and revolutionary it was back in 1999. It kind of just recontextualized what action could be for the big screen. The Wachowskis' masterpiece's central stylistic conceit, of course, is bullet time, where select heightened moments unfold in slow motion while the camera continues to move through the scene. Bullet time required a highly inventive solution from the film's VFX team, with 120 strategically placed still cameras being triggered consecutively to capture a full range of motion around a subject, before being stitched together in post. Now, on paper, it could have gone horribly wrong, and the Wachowski sisters' murky explanation of the tech is precisely why Will Smith turned down their invitation to star as Neo. Smith, of course, went on to go and be in Wild Wild West, which, you know, sucks for him, but he did also give us that really good song, so, you know, it kind of worked out for everyone, I guess, in the end. Either way, the Wachowski sisters were ultimately vindicated, with the film winning the Oscar for Best Visual Effects and influencing an entire era of action cinema, the reverberations of which are still felt to this very day. Next up, having almost no dialogue. No One Will Save You. You know, that's a really oddly threatening title. Like, I think if I was just walking around and I saw that on a poster, I'd be like, you know what, universe? I see what message you're giving me. I'm gonna go on home. I don't want any of that. I'm gonna go home and hide. My own creeping sense of existential dread aside, there is a good reason why most film scripts are primarily composed of dialogue. It's the easiest way to convey a story to the audience, which is, again, sadly a lesson that the streamers are learning a little bit too well, because now we have second screen viewing, and we have to have actors explain things, like they're just pouring a coffee, and it's like, hello, it is me pouring a coffee. This is the summary of the events that have happened and transpired before we've gotten to this point. Just get off the small screens when you're watching the big screen, folks, please. I beg you, please. It would make me very happy, And other people too, I imagine, We can do better. Goddamn, I need to get back on topic. 2023's sci-fi horror film, No One Will Save You, took quite the gamble when writer and director Brian Duffield decided to have the alien invasion story unfold with barely any dialogue whatsoever. In fact, only 5 words are spoken on screen throughout the 93-minute runtime. And while this could have easily resulted in a tedious experience in lesser hands, between both Duffield and star Caitlin Dever, it absolutely works. Duffield has a keen eye for suspenseful set pieces, and Dever manages to invest the audience in her predicament through the sheer physicality of her performance, exposition be damned. While some might have hoped that the film had a little more meat on its bones in the word department, by and large it got away with visual storytelling propelled forward by a terrific central turn. On the way, shooting over 12 years. Boyhood. Richard Linklater's coming-of-age drama Boyhood is one of the most ambitious and mind-boggling works of cinema ever completed. For while it didn't require cutting-edge visual effects or a massive budget, it did require long-term commitment from its central cast. You see, Boyhood was shot over a period of 12 years to capture the growth of protagonist Mason, played by L.R. Coltrane, in real time. Linklater reconvening with Coltrane, Ethan Hawke, Patricia Arquette, and several other key cast members once a year for a few weeks of filming. Though Linklater had a broad idea of the overall storyline, he only wrote the material for each year in the lead-up to shooting, while permitting the cast to make their own contributions. It goes without saying that Boyhood could have so easily been a disastrous failure, and yet, it's a masterpiece. While Linklater said that he intended to work any potential issues, like an actor's death, into the story, what would he have done if, say, the lead simply decided to quit the film a few years in? Thankfully, shooting went smoothly by most accounts, and Boyhood was finally released in 2014 to universal praise, receiving 6 Oscar noms and winning a well-earned Best Supporting Actress gong for Arquette. Never one to be outdone though, Linklater is currently shooting an adaptation of the musical Merrily We Roll Along, with production to be completed over 20 years to accurately show the characters aging over time. Good lord. Next up, making an $150 million sequel to a dead franchise. Mad Max Fury Road. A whole decade plus removed from Mad Max Fury Road, and goddamn that's a long time, it's easy to understate just how much of a risk George Miller's franchise redefining action masterpiece actually was. Somehow, Miller convinced Warner Bros. To bankroll an $150 million sequel in a franchise whose last entry was 30 years prior, and which underwhelmed both critically and commercially. More to the point, Miller was well into his late 60s by the time shooting started, and hadn't made an action film since the previous Mad Max, while demanding an R rating from the studio. Production was also fraught with all manners of issues due to both the remote location shoot and an on-set fracas, God, great word, between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, only for China to make its financial exposure worse by refusing to release the film. And yet, with all these circumstances conspiring against it, Mad Max Fury Road released to universal acclaim. Its kinetic action, stunning cinematography, stellar performances, and basically every other aspect of its production receiving staggering praise. Like, think back to when Fury Road was first announced. Who among us could have actually thought that it would end up with 10 nominations for Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and then go on to win 6 of them? It's just wild. While its $380.4 million box office haul was relatively modest for a movie in 2015, Fury Road is a film that categorically shouldn't have worked, and yet is destined to live on as a generational all-timer blockbuster. Next up, killing James Bond. No Time to Die. No Time to Die will forever be remembered as the James Bond film that did the one thing many never expected the franchise to do, and that was kill off one of its 007s. Probably the only thing that I remember the movie for, because I didn't think it was that good. Is that controversial? You can let me know in the comments below what you think of it. I just find the whole Daniel Craig era of James Bond totally fascinating and bizarre, because Casino Royale, it's a masterpiece, it's its own tonal creation. Quantum of Solace is kind of a mess, but, you know, it isn't without its charm. Skyfall is a great movie, but is so thoroughly unlike Casino Royale that it is kind of jarring in hindsight. Spectre is bad, and then No Time to Die is just kind of, again, a little bit weird, and yeah, it's a shame. Daniel Craig, amazing Bond, but the movies overall, kind of frustratingly up and down. Either way, Craig's final outing as the legendary spy concluded with him being blown to smithereens by a missile strike in order to destroy villain Safin's nanobot factory, and of all the left-field creative choices made across 6 decades of Bond movies, this was, by far, the single most risky. And yes, I am even including the time that he dressed up as a clown for that. That should have been a risk. You know, James Bond is a clown, 00 clown, 00 honkers. You know, a good pun will come to me eventually. Maybe not in this entry, maybe not in the next one, but by the end of the video, I'll have a good James Bond clown pun for you. That is my vow, that is my promise. And if I don't do that, well, I'll present the next video in big squeaky clown shoes. But yeah, unsurprisingly, Bond's death in the movie didn't go down well with all fans, but it certainly felt like a fitting end, I guess, for Craig's iteration of Bond, which was by far the most gritty and cynical take on the character to date. More to the point, it helped achieve a level of emotional resonance basically unheard of in the series since On Her Majesty's Secret Service, while drawing the most decisive line imaginable under Craig's run. However, this is also one of those daring gambits that the series will likely only ever get away with once, because even if Bond was killed off again in another 20 years or so, it wouldn't land with nearly the same impact. Next up, an 138-minute single-take movie, Victoria. There are a small handful of films which have been shot in a single, uninterrupted take for real, but none are quite as impressive as 2015's German crime thriller, Victoria. The movie, which centers around a Berlin bank robbery, isn't merely a low-key drama unfolding in a single location, it's a staggeringly ambitious genre film which sees the cast and crew traipsing all over Berlin in the middle of the night. Now, because shooting a film in a single take isn't hard enough with everything else that needs to be choreographed, Victoria has numerous location moves and car chases, where a cheeky member of the public could have easily intervened and blown a take. On top of that, most of the dialogue was improvised and it's 138 minutes long, running counter to the tendency for single-take films to clock in at a more manageable 90 or so minutes. The only safety net the director Sebastian Schipper had was that, in order to get financiers aboard, he shot a conventional version of the film first over a period of 10 days, before having 3 attempts to shoot the single-take version. After the first 2 takes were deemed unsatisfactory, the third and final take was the one that became Victoria, which is just really cool. Next up, making a parody sequel, Gremlins 2: The New Batch. Gremlins 2: The New Batch is an extreme rarity in Hollywood. A carte blanche sequel in which a filmmaker was given all the money and resources to basically do whatever the hell they wanted without studio interference. That was director Joe Dante's demand to Warner Brothers if he was going to return to direct the Gremlins sequel. And desperate for a follow-up from the master filmmaker, they handed him triple the budget of the first film and total freedom to do with it whatever the hell he saw fit. The result was, in Dante's own words, quote, one of the more unconventional studio pictures ever, which, that's kind of putting it lightly. Gremlins 2 is a sequel that effectively functions as a parody of the original Gremlins, making light of its inconsistent internal logic, breaking the fourth wall, and basically serving as a thinly veiled excuse for a whole ton of practical effects mayhem. It would have been so easy for Gremlins 2 to be an abject mess, but it's shocking just how well it holds together as a ludicrously entertaining sequel that builds on what came before. WB might have had a different view of it though, given that the film was a massive box office flop. But who cares? Time has been extremely kind to Gremlins 2, and it remains one of the most brilliantly fearless sequels ever produced at a major Hollywood studio. Next up, shooting with only natural light. The Revenant. The Revenant is truly one of the most insane productions in modern filmmaking history, if only because director Alejandro González Iñárritu and cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki decided to shoot the film with entirely natural light. Even the most basic camera setups in films are generally assisted by additional studio lighting, and so to shoot most of the film in the remote expanses of British Columbia with only God-given light is absolutely absurd by any typical method. Because the cast and crew's lodgings were roughly an hour away from the shooting location, Iñárritu was limited to incredibly small windows of time each day to get the desired look, causing shooting to drag out from a planned 6 months to almost 10, resulting in the budget also ballooning from $60 million to $135 million. Yeah, it's a truly ridiculous way to make a movie, and yet, fortunately for Iñárritu, The Revenant went on to win Best Director, Actor, and Cinematography Oscars, while also grossing more than $500 million globally. Next up, a sign language film with no subtitles. The Tribe. Miroslav Slaboshapitsky's 2014 crime drama The Tribe is centered around a boarding school for deaf teenage students. And beyond the film being performed by its deaf ensemble cast entirely in Ukrainian Sign Language, the film was also released without any subtitles at all. While audiences watching films in a language they don't understand naturally expect subs or maybe even dubbing, in this case Slaboshapitsky made the artistic choice to withhold them, forcing the non-signing audience to observe body language, facial expressions, and the particulars of the hand signals themselves to make sense of what's going on. Much as it might sound like a gimmick destined to turn many off, it's a fascinating and surprisingly effective experiment which demonstrates just how much can be intuited from visuals without the aid of spoken dialogue or subtitles. And while it could so easily have gone horribly wrong in lesser hands, in this case it helps an already unique film stand out even more. Basically everything about it. Avatar. There's no denying that James Cameron's Avatar is one of the riskiest movies of all time, because even accepting Cameron's enormous commercial successes as a filmmaker, many doubted that he could deliver the goods with an entirely new IP centered around, in the words of many people at the time, blue cat people. Also, Live and Let Pie. Live and Let Pie. That's the James Bond clown movie, because throwing custard pies at people. I think that gives me a stay of execution, to be honest, from any clown-based hijinks in a video for Whatculture. I'm going to pray anyway. You be the judge in the comments. Was that as crap as I thought it was? Let me know. But back to Avatar again, and with a $237 million budget, it's one of the most expensive films ever made. It bet all its chips on 3D technology and did it all as a sci-fi movie, a genre which has historically proven hit or miss with mainstream audiences. Even with the success of Titanic, many simply found the potential for failure too overwhelming for Cameron this time around. only for him to, once again, prove all the naysayers wrong, and do it again a further 2 times after that, with The Way of Water and Fire and Ash. While we all know that Avatar's story isn't much to write about, its lush visuals, overall world building, and strong performances from Zoe Saldana and Stephen Lang made it one of the most unforgettable cinematic experiences of the last 20 years. People like to say that Avatar somehow has no cultural footprint, but that's really lazy. The movies continue to be massive successes that, people go and watch and turn out for, even after like a 10-year hiatus, Just stop it with the whole it's not got a cultural footprint or whatever. Those movies matter. They're a great piece of technical filmmaking. And let James Cameron do what he wants, because he's made enough good choices with his movies to justify the leeway to make more great movies. Sorry, I get really bogged down in that whole it has no cultural footprint thing, because it makes no sense to me. If the movie is seen by loads of people and makes a bunch of money, and we're still talking about it years later, then yeah, it had a cultural footprint and continues to have one. Next up, recording live vocals, Les Misérables. The vast majority of movie musicals are shot with the music and vocals pre-recorded, allowing the cast to simply lip-sync over playback on set. However, for Tom Hooper's 2012 adaptation of Les Misérables, he decided to have the cast sing on set for real, with them interesting results. This required the cast to wear earpieces where they could hear a live piano accompaniment of each song, allowing them to keep their tempo correct in the scenes in question. But it naturally created a technical headache for the crew, who of course had to ensure that a huge ensemble cast vocals were accurately captured through physically rigorous set pieces. While Hooper's adaptation remains divisive among Les Mis fans, the actual live singing gimmick paid off pretty spectacularly. It gave the actors more freedom in the expressiveness of their performances, rather than being shackled to a pre-recorded piece of music. When Hugh Jackman sings Look Down while pulling a giant rope, we can hear the effort of him straining physically, which lends a greater visceral quality to his performance than it would have done if it was just pre-recorded. You probably wouldn't want every musical film to be shot this exact way, but for a treatment as gritty and tactile as this, it absolutely made sense. As such, Les Misérables went on to win the Best Sound Mixing Oscar, and yeah, that one is definitely deserved. Next up, moving a 320-ton steamship over a hill for real. Fitzcarraldo. Never wanted to do things the easy way, Werner Herzog decided that the only way to show a steamship being dragged over the Andes Mountains in his epic drama, Fitzcarraldo, was to just do it for real. Which was a very interesting decision when you had a psychopath like Klaus Kinski on your set, as has been well documented. Herzog had his crew drag a 320-ton steamer over a hill in the Peruvian Amazon without the use of special effects, ensuring what we see in the final film was achieved entirely in camera. It's complete lunacy to even attempt such a feat, and beyond the obvious health and safety concerns, the sheer logistics make it impossible by modern filmmaking standards. Like, no studio on the planet nowadays would let a filmmaker do what Herzog did for real, opting instead for the safer, less arduous process of visual effects. But the sheer toil of Fitzcarraldo's creation only adds to its mesmerizing heft, and knowing that what we see on the screen was done without any sort of behind-the-scenes trickery is a huge part of what has made it endure for almost 50 years. Next up, casting Michael Fassbender, Steve Jobs. The easiest way to sink any biopic is to whiff the casting, and many immediately questioned Michael Fassbender's casting in Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs for understandable reasons. Given that Fassbender neither looked nor sounded much like the real Apple co-founder, it seemed like his casting would prove immediately immersion-breaking for many. It didn't help either that Christian Bale, who bears far more of a physical resemblance to Jobs, was originally in talks to play the part, and by comparison Fassbender, for all his talent, just seemed kind of not as well suited. But Boyle and Fassbender were ultimately vindicated when Steve Jobs turned out to be a highly illuminating film, with Fassbender going on to receive a Best Actor Oscar nom. While many reviews admitted that Fassbender's physical and spoken resemblance to Jobs was far from perfect, clearly he and Boyle were far more interested in capturing the man's spirit rather than focusing on an act of pure mimicry. And in that respect, they passed with flying colours, even if the casting might have partially contributed to the film's box office failure. But you know what? Have enjoying the pantheon of great biopic performances from actors who look nothing like their chosen subject. Which is like an award that maybe goes to like 2 people I can think of, the other being Anthony Hopkins for Nixon, which is an illustrious club to be a part of, let's be real. On the way, combining live action and animation. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Though Who Framed Roger Rabbit wasn't the first film to combine animation with live-action filmmaking, it was the first to do so in such a comprehensive and technically complex and also ludicrously expensive way. Director Robert Zemeckis and executive producer Steven Spielberg insisted that the film's animated characters interact with the physical environments in a tactile way, requiring robotic arms and string to manipulate props in their absence before the animation was composited in post-production. In 1988, years before CGI became the norm and such wizardry became, kinda trivial, it was a massive gamble, and one which took 7 months to shoot at a cost of over 50 million simoleons. But of course, as we all know, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a massive critical and commercial success, even winning a Special Achievement Academy Award for its animation direction. And you know what? Best of all, it still looks absolutely brand spanking brilliant today. A testament to the ingenious techniques Zemeckis and his crew employed to bring their madcap vision to life. Next up, making it entirely in secret. It Was Just an Accident. It Was Just an Accident is the latest film from Iranian filmmaker Jafar Panahi, who had a 20-year filmmaking ban imposed upon him in 2010 by the Iranian government for criticizing the regime. This has forced Panahi to make his films in extreme secrecy, and as his profile has only continued to grow, each new project has basically become riskier than the one before. It Was Just an Accident was ultimately shot in Tehran without permits, with a small camera and tiny skeleton crew, allowing the filmmaker to complete principal photography unobstructed. But this was just the beginning. Then came post-production, where there was genuine fear that the film's footage could be seized and destroyed. Ultimately though, the film was edited on an old MacBook Air that was never connected to the internet for security purposes. And while such a clandestine process naturally imposed significant constraints on post, the end result was widely acclaimed, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and receiving 2 Oscar nominations. An amazing spirit of filmmaking ingenuity, and one that everyone needs to go watch.